Many Israeli scholars define the Israeli societies as ethnic democracy, not a true democracy. Something which was missing in today's discussion was another dimension of Middle Eastern society and Israeli society, i.e., the fact that Israeli society in particular is a theocratic society which has obviously an impact on the freedom of people. It is an authoritarian society and also an impact on the freedom of women. And I think that we could find some common ground in that, because there are many studies, both from the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, which clearly indicate the arbitrary approach followed because of the culture of militarism. There is a lot of domestic abuse in the Israeli society which are related to this type of culture. And of course there is impoverishment of many layers of Israeli society because of military expenditure. And we know what happens, the lot of Gaza and the occupied territories. Women can find a common ground because they are confronted with inadequate leaderships, male chauvinist leaderships. So I would give the possibility to women to have a saying in that. When I was in Israel, I wanted to organize a conference because I have been in touch with many feminist scholars from the Palestinian and the Israeli side. And I think this is an exercise that could be usefully undertaken by the international community because it would give a saying to women and to civil society. Thank you very much. I quite agree on the fact that this first conference has taken stock of some bits and pieces of Israeli society, which is far more complicated. We do have to consider theocracy, the position of women, domestic abuse, which we haven't looked at. This is just one seminar, and we would have to sort of add some other dimensions, something that we wanted very much to consider were the internal contradictions of Israeli society. Jafar mentioned it, talking about the Mizrahis, Sephardi, Ashkenazis, and the different kinds of Haredim. It's extremely complicated to come into a detailed analysis of Israeli societies. We have sort of selected some items that could be sort of related to the second conference on Palestine. But as a feminist, as a woman, I feel that we haven't heard someone describing the point of view of the Israeli women movement, because we are now looking at Israel and its contradiction. We don't want to sort of mix everything. So we have set out this particular process that we should first look at Israel and then at Palestine. And this could be very useful for us to take some step forward. So this is not the end of this process that we want to undertake. And what is important about this gathering here today is that we want to bring together institutions such as the Basso Foundation and its possibility of having an impact on legal aspects of problems, and then the position of activists. We'd like to try and fill the gap between those who are sort of being engaged in solidarity work to support the rights of Palestinian people, and others, scholars and experts that are involved in conducting research on these issues. So it's a first step that we've undertaken today, but we still have to look at a number of other aspects pertaining to Israeli societies. So hopefully we'll be in a position to fill such gaps at a later stage. If there are no further questions. Talked at length about rights and duties, and I think that one of the fundamental rights of the peoples is to have access to education. The question is the following. My question is the following. Is there a discrimination against the Palestinian people when it comes to access to education, and how does it sort of come about? And are there any opportunities to change this state of affairs? Because this is very important. I think it's as important as the point raised about labor by Basso.
Works? There is a huge discrimination in education, first of all in budgets. Palestinian citizens of Israel receive about 2.5% of the budget that they should receive as 20% of the population. Their schools are beyond standard. The classes are horrible to full, no libraries, no computers, etc., etc. So on this level, there is a huge discrimination. But the main discrimination is that they basically study the same books that we study, only translated to Arabic, which means they study nothing about themselves. Yeah. Not their history, not their literature, not their poetry, nothing. In the Palestinian Authority books is very censored and supervised by Israel, both directly and indirectly through the European Union and World Bank. And also they cannot study anything about themselves. They can study about Islam until the 17th century, and that's all. Nothing that have to do with nationalism, with the refugee problem, with the Nakba is not there. So all the population of Palestinians come out of school without knowing anything about themselves. And this is really what is called in the literature cultural genocide, because the culture is exterminated and the society cannot live as a society without its culture. This is the main. Now another group in East Jerusalem, it's even worse because they have the Palestinian school books, but they are under they are sponsored by the Israeli municipality and Ministry of Education, so they receive books where you have more blank pages than written pages. You have 1 page written and then 3 pages that are just white. Everything is deleted. This is a very serious situation, both the physical and the budget discrimination, and of course the education, which is not education. I mean, at least officially, that a whole nation cannot study anything about themselves, and they have to study about the Zionist project and hailing the occupation and study Israeli literature, Israeli poetry, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Let me answer this question.
Sorry, there's no microphone.
Of Palestinians? Literacy of Palestinians, by the way, in Gaza a few years ago, the literacy was 92%, one of the highest in the world, I think. Today, of course, they find it very difficult. They don't have schools, they don't have books, they don't even have pencils. But, and every year there's someone in Gaza who comes first on the baccalaureate, and you have the picture how this girl studies to her cell phone or to a candle and so on and so forth. But today the situation is much, much worse in all of Palestine.
Let me add maybe about the education system of the Palestinians inside the Green Line, inside Israel. The education system in Israel is separated one. So the state of Israel controls the education, but actually there is Arab education, and also in the Hebrew education there is different groups. But the Arab education system is controlled by the state institutions. I will give you some data about the gaps. Let me, before the gaps, before the numbers, for us education is a strategic issue. So in general for Palestinians, is very strategic issue, and people are investing in education as a tool of struggle. And let me give you some data. The gap inside Israel in high schools between Arab children and Jewish children in the amount how much the Israeli government is investing reached to 12,000 shekel per child. 12,000 shekel. If they put money, they put 32,000 shekel in Jewish child, they put about 18,000 to 20,000 in the Arab child. We need in the education system inside Israel, not in the West Bank, 6,000 classrooms. Especially in the Bedouin community in the Negev, in some cases kids need to travel every day from unrecognized villages because they refuse to open schools in these places, about 40 kilometers every day to reach to school. This has an impact on female education. But the good news that, I don't know how much it's good news, I will explain it a little bit. Today in higher education, more than 60% of the students are females, are Palestinian girls that go and study. It creates internal problem in balance in education and between men and women. Arab, like 15 youth, they drop out from schooling in high percentage and they go to work in infrastructure. And females are going to universities, and this creates gaps between not only in capacities, but also in social issues between women and men inside the new generation, the young generation. About textbooks, my mother used to tell me how her village was transferred to Lebanon. My father used to tell me how we lost, in one day, they wake up after 2 weeks of being closed in their home, and out of 70,000 Palestinians in Haifa, they left with 1,500 people. You lose your neighbors, your relatives, everything. So we didn't need the Israeli textbooks to tell us what happened in the Nakba, for example. When I was talking to Al Jazeera about the Nakba, I was, the stories of my father. It's not the stories of 3,000 years. We don't need to dig under Jerusalem 3,000 years to prove that we have a relationship to the land. Okay, we know the land. We are the face of the land. We are the people of this land. So really, when we look at what this whole government is doing to dig under Jerusalem, we don't need to dig under Jerusalem. We know that we have history of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Jerusalem. We know because we were there all over the years, and I think it's part of, I'm really not afraid when it comes to my identity or the identity of my kids. When they investigate me when I was 18 years old, I gave the same answers like my child when he was investigated, when he was 18 years old after a demonstration that they were organizing at their school during the war against Gaza. We are Palestinians. We know that. The whole way when you are minority, you try to play these games, to behave, to try to find your way with the majority. But in the end of the day, even if you serve in the Israeli army and you serve the occupation, and there is 10% of our population that serve in the army and serve the occupation, in the end of the day, they don't let them to be Israelis. They don't want them. So in the first, when they go in the line in the airport, they will racially profiled even if they were officers in the Israeli army. So in this sense, even if they don't teach you, you will find yourself as a Palestinian, even as a minority, you will find your identity. I think it's very important to take a note about what's going on in universities. We are the minority. In Israel today, after like 70 years, there are 64 colleges and universities. One of them is in the occupied territories in Ariel. Okay, 64. We have been prevented until now from building university or a college even. Okay, there was a bid for the first time in 2015. Now we are holding a case in the Supreme Court against the Higher Education Council. We can't build university until now. We are almost 2 million Palestinians living inside Israel. In Zababdi, in Jenin, under the occupation, there was a newly built university that have been built. So to compare the situation in the occupied territories, there is Birzeit University, and there is Jenin and Nablus University, and even in Gaza there is university. Today, we have about 10,000 Palestinian students from inside the Green Line that study in the occupied territories and in Jordan, but we can't build university because the stupid people sitting in the Ministry of or in the Higher Education Council, they think that they control us by preventing us from making research about ourselves and about our realities and building strategies in university is not only about teaching. So we have court case now dealing with our right to establish the first college. In Italy here, in Bari and in other universities, you will find a lot of Palestinian students from inside the Green Line because we believe, we lost our lands. Our lands have been confiscated. Only 3.5% of the lands in Israel are owned by Palestinians, by the 20%. So we are investing in education, and somehow we are becoming the Jews of the diaspora. We, inside Israel, we believe that by education and by, I used to write in Hebrew, and, my language editor in the newspaper, in Hebrew newspaper, she used to tell me, you write better than Jews. We want to outreach to them and liberate them in universities. So part of the discussion today about our right to have even university, some Palestinians say, no, we have to go to the Israeli universities, and there is our struggle. So I don't think that we have, identity problem as the Palestinians inside Israel. We have a lot of challenges in building our future, but we are doing this struggle. And if we will need your commitment, give us the possibility that our students study in your universities here, and make sure to send them back. We need them back to build our institutions inside the Palestinian community, of course inside Israel, but also in the occupied territories. So anybody that is involved in higher education here is invited to host more and more Palestinians, but make sure to send them back in the end of the process. We want them back home.
Grazie. Vi ringraziamo molto, penso che
I'd like to thank you all very much. I think we can draw this to a close with a special vote of thanks to the technicians that have been worked, to the interpreters.
perché appunto sono interpreti che fanno le cose in modo volontario.
That's on a voluntary basis. Just one point which I'd like to make on the school textbooks and the ones which are used within the occupied territories. The work done by Nurit is essential because it does show that textbooks, school textbooks in Israel do not show the Palestinians, but Israel has carried out the polling campaign within the European Union to revise the Palestinian textbooks, the textbooks which are used and distributed in schools in the occupied territories. And it has sort of claimed that within the textbooks, the Palestinian textbooks, there was a hate sort of speech. Well, what was it? It was just a description of a reality on the ground, that the territories were occupied territories. They did not express hatred vis-à-vis the Israeli state. It was just to depict the living conditions of the Palestinians. They had to change the wording of the textbooks of the European Union, would not have no longer supported such textbooks. So what the Israeli state is doing to the life of Palestinians is pervasive and has an impact on every single aspect of their life. So I'd like to thank you all for your contribution. We shall meet again with the Fondazione Basso at the Casa della Pace, Home of Peace, on the 30th of June, and we shall carry on this reflection. This further question, I'd like to thank the sound engineer and the technicians. We will send the streaming of the various presentations in English and in Italian. So hopefully this is going to be useful and will be considered by those who were not able to attend this session. Thank you.